Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to those folks who are joining our webinar today. 5 tips to avoiding CLM implementation disaster. Sounds like a movie title, doesn't it? Really interesting. Great set of slides and really interesting topic. Folks are still joining us, so you haven't missed anything. But if you are here to listen to the 5 tips to avoiding CLM implementation disaster, you are most definitely in the right spot. And we will be starting our webinar in just a few minutes' time. I see that the folks are still entering, so I will give it just a couple more seconds and then we shall begin. There we go. So again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to our Agiloft partnered webinar today, 5 tips to avoiding CLM implementation disaster. My name is Paul Branch, and for those that don't know me, I am the Chief Technology Officer here at World Commerce and Contracting, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome to our stage today 2 experts in their fields. You're going to hear in a moment from Susan Koch, who's from Young's Holdings, and she's our practitioner expert today. So lots to learn from Susan. So please do engage and ask questions as we go. And then Danielle Haugland who's the Global Alliance Director at Agiloft. Welcome both to the stage today. Before we start and get into the meat of it, housekeeping as usual. The presentation will run for about 45 minutes and there'll be an opportunity for some Q&A at the end. We do encourage you to ask questions though as we go. And as the moderator today, I will try and ask as many of those questions as we can fit into the allotted time that we have. So please do keep the questions coming. You can ask those questions using the Q&A tab, which is right down the bottom of your screen, and just type in your question and then it will come through to us in the panel. And yes, you will be offered a link to the recording and also to the slides, and that will be communicated to you once the session completes. So without further ado, then let's move into our meat for today. Now, as most of our participants today know, World Commerce and Contracting is very much focused on research into commercial and contract management, particularly into the impact that automation is going to have, but is having today on the role of the commercial and contract management professional. Interesting research that we conducted during the beginning of the pandemic suggested that 64% of the guys that responded to the survey, and this was over 500 corporations, had not made a material investment in automation. So in many aspects of the CLM process from beginning to end. Interesting data point in itself. Much more interesting though, I think, is that 81% of those same responders said that they plan to do so in the next 12 months. So there's a huge focus at the C-suite and below around the benefits of automation into the CLM process, and a recognition of the importance of the role of commercial and contract management. Yay for the team. Key though to this transformation, I think, is that the barriers to entry are now much lower even than they were 6 months ago, when with the movement into cloud particularly, and with the prevalence of some really good contract lifecycle management capabilities in this space, cost per contract has dropped significantly. So that's the landscape in which we operate. Now, Danielle, does this reflect your experiences from what you've seen, or are you seeing something different at Agiloft?
Yeah, no, this is pretty on par with what we're seeing both in peer industry research and anecdotally in our own pipeline opportunities coming in. We're seeing more and more interest in automation for a variety of reasons. I mean, automation can do a lot of things. It can, kind of cut down on human error. It can provide an audit trail, and it can just make things faster.
Sure. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what's happening in Agiloft at the moment?
Sure. So it is, by the way, thank you, Paul. It's really great to be here with you. And it's been quite a ride this year. Last August, we announced a $45 million growth equity investment with FTP Capital and immediately put that to work in bringing in amazing leaders like Eric Laughlin, our CEO, who joined mid last year, Elizabeth Bykoff, VP of Alliances, near and dear to my heart, and Andy Wishart, our new Chief Product Officer, who has an immense background in the contract space. Even before the investment, though, Gartner recognized us as a leader in its first ever CLM Magic Quadrant. And then a few weeks later, in its critical capabilities report, Gartner put Agiloft as the top rated CLM vendor in all 4 use cases: legal, sales, procurement, and enterprise. And more recently, and this is one I'm really excited about, in the Gartner Peer Insights, our customers have given us 4.9 out of 5 stars, primarily for the platform's flexibility and ease of use. So it's been a fun and deeply rewarding year. And of course, none of this would be possible without our great customers like Susan Koch of Young's Holdings. I'm not going to steal Susan's thunder because she has a lot of great information and insight to share today. But after getting to know her a little bit, she's a real life legal superhero because she, with the support of her general counsel, negotiates and manages all of Young's Holdings contracts, every single one. So Susan, tell us about your role and how you achieve superhero status.
Hello, everyone. So I'm joining you from Young's Holdings, Inc. in Southern California. Young's has been in operation since 1888. It's a family-owned business, and they take that very seriously. They do a culture of family. They started out in the retail markets, and after Prohibition, they switched to the marketing, sales, and distribution of wine and spirits. So that's their current business. There are a total of 19 companies in the Young's family. The predominant ones are Infinium Spirits, the 2 Wilson Daniels wine companies, and Young's Market Company, which is now Republic National Distributing Company, or RNDC. I will talk more about that transaction. That was very vital with our experience with Agiloft doing that split. I'll get in more detail with that as we proceed down our webinar. My role at Young's is the corporate paralegal, as Danielle mentioned. I manage all the corporate governance matters, do all the licensing, trademark, and I work closely with our general counsel on contract drafting and negotiations. Our legal team consists of, I like to say, 3 people: myself, our general counsel, and Agiloft. I refer to Agiloft as my coworker because it has freed up so much of my time, has made my work so much more efficient. It has truly been a lifesaver in my sanity. So I joined Young's about 8 years ago, and there was a drastic need for some type of organization with their contracts. Young's operated at that time in 13 states, which with multiple locations in each state. Every location had their own way of storing contracts. They had their own way of, every part of the contract process was managed independently from each other, but it was up to me to find these agreements. I would spend hours a day looking for agreements. Very frustrating, as you all can experience. There is no consistency in how the contracts were drafted. They used different forms, different storage methods, different calendaring, if calendaring was even done. So we needed to organize all the documents. We also had some corporate transactions that required diligence. I mentioned the Young's Market RNDC transaction. In 2019, Young's Holdings sold 50% of Young's Market to RNDC. RNDC now manages Young's Market. So that involved a great deal of diligence. Young's Market, being a distribution company, had extensive contracts, both for the distribution and for warehousing. So Agiloft was very critical in not only helping me gather the diligence documents, but after the transaction completed, we were able to, within moments, split up Agiloft into 2 contract management systems, one that stayed with Young's Holdings and the other one that went over with Young's Market Company. By setting up our internal company structure within Agiloft, that was a seamless and flawless experience and made me very happy. We also needed to manage renewals. We were not aware of when contracts would be auto renewals. So that would automatically roll over without being aware of that. That also prevented us from doing a lot of negotiations that we would probably have wanted to do. And the biggest problem, partially executed agreements. We would get one side of the signature, but not the other side, and we would move on, and no one had time to follow up on that. So we were in dire need of some type of management with our contracts. So while we were shopping around to see what the solution was, I tried different solutions. I did different spreadsheets to maintain the contracts, to try to do some type of summary that helped, but it was very time consuming. We attempted standardized emails to alert our executives of what contracts were coming down. We thought if they saw the same body of an email, that would help things. And that was helpful, but it did not solve all of our problems. We also attempted to adapt to ServiceNow for contract negotiation approvals. That fell flat on its face. It was just a cumbersome tool. It was not made for contract management. Our executives did not like the way they had a difficult time reviewing the agreement or getting the information they needed to make a good decision on whether or not to allow that, continue on with that contract or not. It also did not help us much with calendaring or, getting the executions. So we have 5 tips. We settled on 5 big ones. We don't want to settle for cookie cut demos. Implementation is critical. We want to get buy-in when you adopt it, and you don't want to become dependent on your vendor, and you want to make sure your vendor is always helping you get better.
Hey, Susan, do you mind if I jump in here? And I agree with you. Those 5 tips or pitfalls to avoid disastrous implementation are critical. But even before you get there, and you touched on this in your setup, the work that you put in, even before you start thinking about contract management, is truly critical. I mean, literally, pre-work makes the dream work, right? So getting stakeholders together to talk about what you want, talk about current processes, the desired end state and how to get there, what you want to achieve, kind of getting all of that wrapped up is so important. And Susan, as we were prepping for this, you mentioned that in hindsight, it would have been fantastic to have 1 or 2 other coworkers to work with you on the requirements gathering. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, when we started the implementation, it was myself, an assistant general counsel, and a woman from our procurement department. Those 2 dropped off. Everybody's busy, so it became myself, and I doing all the implementation. And in hindsight, as you mentioned, I should have reached out first to each department, find out what each department's needs were. What did they want out of a contract solution? I was able to backtrack and go, build Agiloft for each of those departments. But of course, I would have saved a lot of time and effort if I had just spent a half hour talking to each department, not necessarily for them to join in on the implementation, but just for me to get an idea of what they were after. What type of metrics did they want? What type of capabilities did their department have to make use of all the tools that Agiloft offered?
That's consistent with our research too. Stakeholder engagement, the way you've just described it, is one of the major pitfalls. Folks really struggle to do that, but it underpins how important it is, because otherwise, particularly if you've engaged with a tool that is hard to amend, it becomes very costly in the implementation cycle then to try and meet the needs of stakeholders that arguably you may have been better off listening to at the beginning. So that's a really important observation. Some great feedback coming in already, Susan. You've obviously hit a nerve. Thalia says that great description of the challenges that you've shared that are exactly the same as the ones that she has. So, thank you for that. Let's learn a bit more about what you did, and let's learn from your experiences around these 5 tips to avoid disaster. Thank you.
Okay, cookie cutter demos. I think every contract management system will show you all of the wonderful bells and whistles that the system will allow you, but ask them, is this what we're purchasing? Make sure that you understand what you're getting. in your package versus what the whole system can allow, so that you're not surprised when you start implementing that we didn't know we couldn't do that. So understand what you want out of it before you start doing the demos. The demos will help raise issues and kind of alert you to things that you were not aware of. So take notes, pay attention, and ask a lot of questions on those demos.
Before we move off that though, Susan, Bob's asked, what sort of questions would you ask? Seems a bizarre question, but what if you were to engage in this in these demos? How could you avoid being bamboozled is the wrong word, but how could you avoid being led down this path of just seeing what the tool was really good at? What sort of questions would you ask?
Just find out when you know what your company needs out of a contract management system, as they show you all the wonderful screenshots, just very pointedly ask them, is that the basic system, or is that a bell and whistle that is added? Will you be able to teach me how to do those, make those changes? Or will we have to come back to you for it? And if there are things that should be added, it will help you determine if you really need those other features. But find out just how robust the system is without have them show you just the bare naked system with the lowest ring of the management system that they have, and then build off of that rather than start with the top and come back down.
I've been in this selection process for CLM tools 2 or 3 times in my career, and I've found a really useful thing is to run through a real use case that reflects your business, not the use case that best demonstrates capability, but the use case that shows how Young's Holdings widely distributed, complex distribution and engagement infrastructure, how that organizational structure and the fact that you've got a very, very, very small legal team, how can that tool support that sort of engagement? They're the sorts of teasing questions that I think we should be asking. Does that resonate, Susan?
Excellent points.
Cool.
And if I could piggyback on that, and at the risk of getting the ire from my solutions engineers team, ask to do something live. So in the demo, say, oh, hey, can I see this, real time? And, kind of throw a curveball in there.
Right.
Perfect.
And there are things where many tools, let's put it this way: the higher end tools perform well in absorbing contracts that are scanned, so that you have to do optical character recognition at the input stage. Other tools struggle more to make that a reality. So those sorts of things, I agree with Danielle. Push for demonstrations of capability, live ideally, but at least to be very clear on what the tool can and cannot do, and how that would impact your ability to consume the services that the tool provides. Yeah, good point. Good point.
Implementation. Like Danielle said, the more time you spend before, the better off you are. In hindsight, when we implemented Agiloft, I wish I had understood more of the roles of the groups and teams and departments, because that flows into workflow and just the whole way the system talks to each other. So that I should have spent more time doing that. So pay attention to understand how all of those factors work in Agiloft, how the groups work, how the teams work, how the departments work, and from that build off of that. Make sure that you get understanding of what you want out of the system so that you can focus on the correct implementation. And even wheedle down into things like, how do people talk about our contracts? For example, on the Young's Market side with the distribution, many times the suppliers' names they would contract under a name that no one was familiar with, but they would know the product name. So we have a table in there for products so that you can search by the product name. Otherwise, many people won't be able to find the right contract. It's those types of things that you need to figure out before you start implementing so that you can get things set up from the get-go. Agiloft is very adaptable. Don't think that you can't change if you change your mind, but it just makes things stream along much faster. Your implementer, at least my experience with Agiloft, he understood the contract process as well as I did. So he was able to kind of lead us down. Are you sure you want to do that? Versus perhaps you could do this instead. He gave very good insights. Make use of your implementer. Ask him questions about things that he's seen. He's implemented how many of these, right? So learn from his experience. Ask him how other companies have done what you want to achieve, and he'll be able to give you excellent insight into making your system better.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. Build on, I mean, most of these implementations are not the first time, not the first rodeo for these service providers. They have a wealth of experience about what works, what doesn't. James brings out a really good point, though. He said, wouldn't it be better to insist that the vendors perform their due diligence on your needs as part of this demonstration of capability, and certainly as part of the implementation activity, rather than just trying to fob you off with their vanilla system? So I think, yeah, absolutely, James. I think you're spot on there. That's what you should expect from a service provider. And if there's any reluctance to do that, then that should be a red flag for you in that review cycle. Before you get into implementations, you go through a selection process that identifies the ultimate solution for you. Very good. So clearly implementation is critical. Again, engaging the stakeholders, as we just talked about, is really, really important. Any other hints and tips about implementation? Understanding requirements up front so that you can deploy them before. Any thoughts about how to go about it? Did you do it all in one go? Did you do it for a particular contract? Did you do it with one sort of entity? How did you approach the implementation?
Because Young's Market being the predominant business, we focused on the distribution agreements. That was the core contract thing. So we focused on those. And then from that, once we had that groundwork laid, then we're able to branch out into the vendor agreements and the warehouse agreements. But by focusing our core business, what made the business tick, that set the good foundation and the spine of Agiloft was very well situated. By the distribution agreements brought in the different suppliers and the different internal companies. So it took care of a lot of the other down the road needs of Agiloft, but by focusing on the core critical, we felt good and comfortable that we had a system that worked from the get-go.
So a couple of questions around your experiences there. In your selection process, how readily did you find service providers willing to provide more in-depth test drives of the software? I think where this questioner is going is there's certainly a material cost of sales from the service provider's perspective to provide a full feature-rich implementation. It's just like doing the whole thing, but for a sale. So what did you, in your experience with working with service providers, obviously Agiloft is the one you selected, was there a willingness to go the full hog and do a full implementation for you, or where was the break point?
Each vendor, of course, approaches things differently. So some of them you had to push harder than others. I made good use of my background as a corporate paralegal in the diligence and setting up data rooms. So bring in someone who's been familiar with those types of features, because it will prompt you to ask them more questions. And if they are hesitant to show you something, then put that down as a no. I mean, that's just how it goes. There's enough contract management systems out there. You should not have to settle for something that, well, maybe we can get past that. You don't want to get past things. You want to get through things.
Very good. Geronimo can always be relied upon to ask great questions. So we have two from him. One's a statement, really. Always have legacy migration and migration possibilities from vendors, particularly with relation to artificial intelligence in mind. So build on, emphasizing the point we made before, build on the experiences of the service provider.
Completely, yes.
Because this is not their first rodeo. They've seen the issues. They've worked with relatively small, big corporations. and they have experience of what works and what doesn't. And Geronimo's second point is the rollout strategy. Keep that in mind. Clearly, your focus was on distribution agreements. Let's get those in and working, because if we can prove it works for them, it's going to work for everything else. That's a fine. Sorry, go ahead.
When we did the distribution agreements, we were careful not to get too crazy with clauses and those types of features within the agreement. We set up 2 clauses just to learn how to do it: the indemnity and single indemnity, double indemnity. But don't get too bogged down with all of the fancy things, because you don't want to have a contract with so many clauses that it stops the system. So start simple and then build. It's
this crawl, walk, run thing before
Correct.
you too sophisticated.
And learn what the clauses can do, what the different variables can do, but do not make that your focus from the start. Start simple and build.
That's such a good piece of advice. I mean, I remember my first CLM implementation, excuse me, we put a lot of energy into workflows and developed the most complicated workflows you could imagine, and they were completely useless.
Right.
We were automating a broken process. So I emulate what you just said. Keep it simple. Start with the basics and then build. Geronimo says, keep the rollout strategy in mind. So big bang versus department by department or country by country. In your case, a totally legitimate way is to focus on a particular contracting type, as you did here with your distribution agreement. So yeah, start small and then expand. Requires a tool, though, that can be deployed like that. Some tools require a big bang, and big bangs make big noise, but they don't often generate results that are acceptable to the business. Much better, my experience, is to do incremental, small steps, not dissimilar to how you deployed yours, Susan, with a focus on, this isn't a muddle. We need to focus on the basics around document management before we start to look at the more esoteric clause libraries. And you're going to get there, but you just need to do it in stages. Cool. Right. Gotcha. Right. Keep your questions coming, guys. I see that there's quite a few in the pipe now, so do keep them coming. Thank you, Susan.
Hey, Paul, can I just jump in and build on something that you said? So you were talking about, you develop these complex workflows. I have never met a process that couldn't be improved at some point. And so when you're thinking about tools, 2 points. Number one, when you're thinking about your processes and implementation, understand that you could build the most amazing process and it's gonna change. It's just going to. There's continuous improvement, contracts change, roles change, things change. So when you're looking at tools, make sure that you get one that can change with you. That was all.
Right. Yeah, really, really sound advice. There's a question here, and you may choose to answer it a bit later, but it's a great question. How much were you able to increase contracting self-service capabilities as a consequence of delivering your implementation?
Huge. Another wonderful feature of Agiloft is I can allow anybody in the company to have access to Agiloft. We don't have licensing issues. So if anybody, any employee of Young's can have access to Agiloft. Through that access, they can request contracts. So they put in their contract request to me. They fill out the company information. They can start that process, and then it comes over to me and our general counsel, and we finish it. But by having them feel like they own their agreements, that's huge. For them to be able to start the process, they talk. They're the business people. They know what they want for that aspect. Communicate that to us. Agiloft is extremely helpful in that because it does streamline all that requesting, that initial start out phase.
Right, gotcha. We're still getting a few questions in, but let's let's keep rolling through the through our five top tips to avoid disaster. Keep going. This is great stuff. Thank you, Susan.
Okay, to prioritize user buy-in and adoption. To me, this revolves around getting our executives to understand how Agiloft works, and that they had to play a role in the approval process. started out, I think you mentioned having a very complex approval process. We had that in the back of our minds, but we pulled way back on it because we understood that the executives are very busy. They don't want 6 different emails coming in every hour asking them to approve a clause or a part of an agreement. On the other hand, we had executives who were very hands-on. So we worked on each, we made them aware of where their role had to fit in to make this process work, and we got their feedback on what they would what would work for them. Because if they're not going to answer the emails, the process stops and it doesn't go any further. And as far as the departments, once we did get the Agiloft, that's how I learned, reaching out to different departments. Each department has its own version of Agiloft now. So you look at a marketing agreement, that screen is completely different than the distribution agreement screen, or the benefit screen, or the corporate transaction screen. But that got, everyone participated in that. And if you don't have expressed to people that are using Agiloft how Agiloft works and what they can get out of it, they will come up with ideas how it will work for them. And you can build that into your Agiloft processes. But you do need them to commit that they will answer their emails and they will approve and they will get things flowing through the cycle.
A really interesting question here. So did you have any apprehension with the company legal team, which would be yourself and your GC, to give that self-serve capability into the sales team or into the guys servicing the distribution agreements?
Agiloft has a wonderful way of setting up permissions. So it's very easy for me to block people's access. They only get access to what they need or want to see. I am able to put in some private family documents in the Agiloft that only 5 people in the company have access to. It's very easy to set those permissions, and they're tight. We even allow outside company with our influencer agreements. An outside company negotiates those for us through Agiloft, so they come into that section of Agiloft, that section alone. They negotiate the influencer agreements, and then they roll back to me to do the final review, sign off, and get them executed and in place. But that's fantastic how Agiloft allows that.
So that's an important step, though, because my question for you was going to be around governance. With this distributed model where you have given authoring control to the folks on the front line, so to speak, it sounds to me like there still is, though, a review cycle that you go through before an agreement is finally executed. Is that correct?
Yeah, then that's just more internal. I think it's just us, and partially because we're still getting used to how things work so smoothly. It's almost suspicious. How could this go that easily without us eyeballing it? But it takes nothing for me to go through and just make sure that the bells and whistles are checked. We are changing agreements so often that I also want to make sure that they're using the last version of the form agreement, because we're able to swap in agreements in and out of Agiloft so easily that it just makes more sense for me to eyeball them, and really takes no time, and it just makes me feel more and warm and fuzzy that things are flowing correctly.
Right. Really interesting. Thank you. We have another question here around the storing of legacy documents. So clearly you shared at the beginning that your document management was haphazard, could we say? And then you've introduced, through this tool, you've introduced a much more robust document management capability. Any hints and tips about how to make that work? How did you prioritize that? How did you encourage adoption for the use of that shared repository?
I did start out with those Excel spreadsheets that I did that summarized agreements. Mm-hmm. Those were vital, and your implementer will help you set up those spreadsheets so that they go into Agiloft with all the different fields and all the different data that you need. So that is rather time consuming, but it's very valuable. So the more time you spend with that, the better off you are down the road. A few people have whined, oh, I have to put that company input that company name each time. Well, yes, you do, but in the long run, it pays off because you have that company in the system forever. And I'm not quite sure if I'm completely addressing that question, but maybe jog me a little bit if I missed the point in that.
Yeah, I think there's another point coming out here that another question is highlighting. When you're importing this legacy information and migrating it from your previous store into this one, any suggestions about how you can, or maybe you can use the technology to extract information, metadata about the contract that you're capturing in the CLM system? Any experiences there that you could share?
Danielle might be better off answering this. Like, we haven't made much use of the AI features at all. Most of our agreements we were very comfortable with, so I was able to pull out what data we wanted. What was unique was when we would have a third paper contract that didn't fit our little cookie cutter of our spreadsheet. So that kind of made us, go back and rethink. But typically, because we do like to use our paper, not third-party paper, we wrote those up as, those are the anomalies, not the norm.
So Danielle, in that space, is there a metadata extraction capability within the tool set?
Yeah, absolutely. Legacy migration is actually a perfect use case for AI because you can bulk extract a number of data points. We have our AI tool embedded within, within Agiloft. So it's a very easy, ingestion phase. And, you extract your key terms, name, date, all of that good stuff. And it makes it pretty simple.
Right. Very interesting. Yeah, I agree. That's a really important part. Okay. Let's move on to number 4, because there's a question that's just come in specifically for this. So share this learning if you would, Susan. Thank you.
Oh, you don't want to have to reach out to your vendor for every little thing that you want to change, because you're going to want to make changes. You're going to have questions. So as you go through your implementation, find out how to do those things yourself. Don't ask. It's nice to have your implementer drive the wagon, but make sure you understand how he did or she did all of those features, because you with Agiloft can do that yourself down the road. I have reached out to customer service for Agiloft when I've just been, time restraints. I was able to go back and make the changes, and I got excellent results from the customer service, very timely and very good, and again, insightful, where they say, are you sure you want to do this versus that? But for the most part, I can change Agiloft myself. And in fact, because of the switch from where we no longer have the Young's Market Company contracts into Agiloft, I'm actually rebuilding our Agiloft right now to focus more on our import and marketing side of the business. So the screens are going to change, the look are changing. I'm even redoing the groups and departments. Young's likes to change their direction, and Agiloft is very easy to change that direction with your company. So you will learn how to do everything with Agiloft. If you don't want to learn, fine, you can reach out to them. But I love Friday afternoons when it gets quiet. That's my Agiloft playtime. I can go in there and I can change contract types. I can change search features. I can add search features. I can do little tweaks and changes to it to make the system better on my own without asking anybody's help. And I'm not a computer geek person. I'm just, no. Things have to make sense to me, and Agiloft to me is very user-friendly. I can, someone asked a question on a social platform yesterday that in our influencer agreements, and I had to think for a minute. Oh yeah, I can go and change it. So I changed it, and before they even finished the question, I had revised that in Agiloft to fix that comment that they had from the third party.
I mean, that really is a great example of being user focused, but that requires a level of agility within the platform that you have to specify at the outset. You have to understand how important that change management is to then have a tool that supports that level of agility. So it puts into the users the ability to control a lot of the user interface and how that tool then works. So question here really about the UI for sure, but also the extent to which your solution is integrated into other platforms. So the questions about workflow, build out process. What was your experience with change management? I think we've talked about that. Does all work now have to be solely within the Agiloft ecosystem, or are there outside application integrations with Word, with email, with electronic signature? And are these, if the answer is yes, are there no code integrations that makes it more palatable, the user says here, but cheaper and less dependent on the vendor? That's to the key of this point, I think.
Well, every aspect of a contract is handled within Agiloft. We start out by inputting the third-party company into Agiloft. We send out our form agreement through Agiloft. It's negotiated through Agiloft through emails. When you go into the record at the end of the day, you can track the whole history of that contract within that company, that contract record. So whenever we send documents out, they go out through email, through Agiloft. The outside party redlines it, sends it back. It goes back into Agiloft. The record is there. We don't have to worry about did they make any other changes to it. You know, none of that can happen. But that everything is contained within Agiloft all the way through to signature. So when you open up an agreement, so you have a marketing agreement, you can see everything that happened to that agreement from the start to the end. I will often, if I get outside emails from the business people, comments on that agreement, I will often save those into Agiloft as a supporting document. So in the back, down the road, why did we go with that aspect? I have that record within the Agiloft record, but everything for that contract is within that one record, and it's fantastic. You don't have to go look for anything. You don't have to find, review, remember. It's all there. Magic.
You can't say better than that. Danielle, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah. So everything Susan said is absolutely critical. You need that, one source of truth, one system of record. But I'm noticing, and Agiloft is doing this too, our newest release is coming out at the end of the month, featuring a tighter integration with Microsoft Word and Outlook, allowing users, should they choose, and frankly, I would be one of those people to choose this path, to work almost exclusively in the tools that they're familiar with. So, your Word, your Outlook, and then push data into the system of record. And that, that promotes user adoption, because if you have a set of executives that are just not going to log into another platform, they want to use the tools that they're familiar with, that they use every single day, and click a button and import data up there, all of that data that Susan just mentioned, so that you have that audit trail, you have that accountability. That's really critical. So more and more vendors are meeting customers where they are and where they work.
Yep. Yeah. And our research is showing that that's not just within the enterprise anymore. It's also within the supply ecosystem. The need to see, have visibility and transparency into your supply chain is hugely important. Okay, we're going to need to move on because there are 5 and we've only talked about 4 so far. So Susan, number 5.
Continuous improvement. Companies change, your contract management system should change as well. Agiloft has a wonderful feedback forum where I've seen where people have commented on how you build your company record. It was kind of cumbersome, so users suggested a solution and Agiloft adopted that solution, and it was wonderful. It solved the problem. I encourage everyone to participate in the weekly seminars that Agiloft offers. Even if the topic isn't of interest to you, you're going to hear things mentioned that will trigger a bell. Oh, maybe we can do this, or maybe we can do that. But there are wonderful ways of learning features of Agiloft that you may or may not even be aware that are out there. And Agiloft has YouTube channels. They have so many different ways of, I can sit on my sofa, and if my husband's watching a movie I'm not interested, I can look at an Agiloft YouTube video and pick up little tips on that. But Agiloft truly wants you to learn how to use the system. They don't want you to become dependent on them. That's my experience anyway. Even when I have reached out for customer support, at the end of that ticket item, they make sure that I understood what happened and how it happened, and if I could do it myself in the future.
Very good. Thank you, Susan. Okay, so what lessons out of this entire engagement? What lessons have you learned from this experience?
We can find our contracts. Last Friday, someone emailed me, we can't find this one agreement. We've looked everywhere. I said, why didn't you look in Agiloft? And here it is. Bang, ding, dong, done. Within 5 minutes, I sent it off to the third party. Everybody was happy. We don't miss the calendaring features in Agiloft. We don't miss auto renewals. We don't miss when contracts terminate. So now if there's an agreement that we know we want to renegotiate before it auto renewals, I can trigger that for an earlier notification period so we can get our business people together to figure out what they want out of that new renewal. We get the timely notices of when things happen, and each contract can be set up differently or set up the same, but it's up to your needs. So now things flow much better. No one gets surprises that, oh, we have to deal with that tomorrow. Yes, because the day after the contract expires. That doesn't happen anymore. We all no longer does my general counsel say, why does this agreement only have one signature? Agiloft, when I come in the morning, I can click on different screenshots of my homepage, and it gives me a little to-do list of what's out there for execution, what's not out there, what's been signed. It's all set out for me. So no longer do we have partially negotiated or partially executed agreements. If something comes to a halt, we don't go pursue it, I can flag that as that, and that ends it in Agiloft. But it's there, it's settled, it's finished, and just the thrill of having the exhibits attached and everything in place with that contract is just so time consuming and wonderful. It's makes my day. We're also seeing a lot more consistency in our contracts with our phrases. Prior to this, there were 3 or 4 different form agreements of distribution agreements that had gone through the history of the company. We now just have the one form agreement, and we know what the basic clauses are all the same. The cost savings has hit us from all different sides. Only if the amount of time that I have saved by not having to spend hours looking for agreements, that alone has been a huge cost savings. We can, previous to Agiloft, I would find in a contract that, who is this person that signed it? I don't even know who this person is. They entered into an agreement on the company's behalf. They weren't authorized, but it was signed. So now we only have authorized signers execute agreements, which also helps with the workflow so that they're aware of what's out there. We have the contract history. Each contract has a complete history within Agiloft of where it started, how it started, and all the different changes that went through that contract. And I can link with our master agreements and our statements of work, things link together nicely so I can relate contracts to each other. So if, like with a financing agreement, if there's some type of guarantee that enters into another agreement, I can link all those so that they all kind of work together almost like a bound volume within Agiloft. And then the organizational changes that split from Young's Market Company and how seamless that was absolutely fantastic. We had 2 systems of Agiloft that worked wonderful. It helped us figure out what contracts needed to be assigned from Young's Holdings over to Young's Market. So we were very proactive with our vendors in that regard, and which also helped with negotiation in some of those assignments.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you, Susan. That's been a really interesting expose of your experiences. Really, really powerful stuff to hear from a practitioner. I love that. Thank you. Danielle, why don't you bookend this for us with a review of what capabilities exist within Agiloft. Let's take a look at not a diatribe around the tool, but some examples of how we can support the sort of use cases that that Susan just described.
Sure. Before I do that, I just wanted to note that we have truly cemented Susan's status as legal superhero today. I mean,
absolutely.
So there's got to be so many people in the audience are saying, I'm her. I mean, because I don't think I'm that unique. I've been a paralegal for a lot of years, and every organization I've been in, you open up a file cabinet, you're like, oh, what's in there?
Well, exactly to that point, you know, your pain points, Young's Holdings pain points are not unique. They're global. Whether you're a small company with a small law department or a huge, you know, multinational company with hundreds of people in their law department, the challenges are the challenges are pretty much the same. And one of the things that you noted in your talk, Susan, was, your instance of Agiloft, the way you set it up, you had different groups seeing different information. And that is absolutely critical. So, when your marketing team logs into Agiloft, they see the information that's relevant to them and the dashboards that are relevant to them. When your legal team logs in, same thing, finance, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is one of the unique capabilities of Agiloft. It's in the name, Agile, no code platform. You can configure use cases and personas and the information each user sees and each group sees to exactly what they need. And it's really easy to do. Susan, I love you. I'm a little bit worried for you that you watch the Agiloft YouTube, but that's awesome. But you can learn to do these things yourself in your law department. And that really is one of the towering strengths of Agiloft, just the flexibility, the agility, and what you can do on your own. So this, for example, what we're looking at now is a legal ops dashboard. We've got a couple of other dashboards to run through to give you a flavor of what other groups would see when they log in. If you could just run through the next one. Thank you. Legal productivity dashboard. This is a dashboard. This information is really going to help drive cycle times down, get to contracting quicker, identify bottlenecks. You can move on to the next one. Vendor summary dashboard, see where your money's going, which suppliers are performing, which contracts are up for renewal. That's really important, right, Susan? Mm-hmm. So all of it's configurable. So
really, that's a good highlight. We're getting lots of questions around interconnection with other platforms. So electronic signature is one. Does Agiloft support electronic signature tools, and if so, which ones? Do you have APIs into these industry standard tool sets?
Yep, absolutely. We have pre-built integrations with DocuSign and Adobe Sign, and several other pre-built integrations. But another feature of the no-code platform and the kind of flexibility is the interoperability with other adjacent commercial systems. So if there's not a pre-built integration, we certainly could build an integration.
We have a document automation software for clause and contract management, says this questioner. Is there any conflict of having such a software embedded into Agiloft? And you've dealt with the electronic signature issue, but could you have a clause library that's maintained somewhere else and then use that within Agiloft, or does it need to be incorporated into the tool set?
I am actually not sure about that, but let me take that back and answer it offline.
Excellent. And a question about data analytics. Obviously, we're finding, based on our research, we're finding that the ability to look at portfolio of contracts, to pull out how many times do you use that particular provision?
Absolutely.
How compare that to what's in your base provision? And do you end up, limitation of liability, do you end up with a cap at one point, whereas you always start at somewhere else and you have to negotiate your way down, and that takes up a lot of time. The ability to do that sort of synthesis and analytics across that portfolio, that's really important. So do you have that capability within Agiloft? Is that something that the tool can do today?
Absolutely. And again, that's another really good use case for AI. Insights at scale is absolutely critical. Another really simple use case is you can look at your contracts across the portfolio, identify which clauses are negotiated the most, and maybe you can go to a fallback provision instead of your standard provision if your standard provision is getting negotiated 90% of the time, and counterparties take your fallback position. So that does a couple of things. It provides more consistency across your contracts, and it reduces your negotiating time, so it gets you to contracting faster.
Right.
We completely had that happen with our influencer agreements. We got comments from the influencers, and we've started with these agreements last spring, and we're constantly updating them based on feedback we're getting from people.
Right. And your business model clearly is very heavily a complex distribution arrangement. That's a key part of your business model. We've got a question here from Baby regarding the construction industry. I don't know if you have any experience of this, Danielle, but maybe this one's coming to you. But Baby asks, what sort of contract management tool do you think is effective in construction? Now, let me have a bash at that first, and then I'll hand it back to you. Construction is an industry that's obviously capitally intensive, but also has a high degree of risk associated with it. We all see particularly if it's a local or central government funded engagement, we all see in the news, we see huge uproar about how long these things take and the cost overruns that occur as a consequence. So yes, there's absolutely a huge need for effective contract and management capability in that space. Technology has a role to play in that, absolutely. A tool that has the ability to manage both pre-award and then most importantly post-award, particularly around obligations tracking and jeopardy management, risk and issues management, so that you can then have that forecasting look to see before the contract really goes off track where the potential risk points, where those pinch points are. That's the hallmark of a good tool. So Baby, I think the answer is you're going to need to look at a tool that has some of these more advanced capabilities in terms of the application of artificial intelligence for portfolio analytics and also effective risk and issues management. Danielle, any thoughts on that?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I'll just reinforce the post-award obligations management functions and features. CLM is sort of going through an evolution. The focus has been on pre-award, pre-signature, being able to create consistency across your contracts, being able to contract faster, automate some of that process from drafting to signature. And now that, that's sort of getting buttoned up, the focus is, for very good reason, going to post-award. And you can do really interesting things with AI, with, getting these insights at scale with obligations management. So for example, with regard to construction contracts, there are very likely penalties for delays. If you are aware of all of those penalties, you can avoid all of those penalties. So it is very important to be able to track and manage those obligations as they come up.
Certainly. I think we have perhaps time for one more question. It's a question and observation. Susan, in your use case, clearly you were dealing with a lot of your own paper. Now, there were instances where you had to deal with third-party paper, but that sounded to me like an exception rather than the rule. I'll welcome you to come back and correct me if I got that wrong. But certainly, Danielle, what features do you think our members should look for if they're really focused on that third-party contract, the third-party paper, as their contract?
Sure. So, I've been talking a lot about AI, using AI at scale, but it's also really helpful in analyzing third-party paper and quickly identifying risks. When you receive a contract, and by the way, this is where the Agiloft Contract Assistant, the word integration comes into play too, because oftentimes you're getting third-party paper via email. You can click on that email, open Word, and analyze that contract, analyze the clauses, analyze the risk, do red lines against your standard clauses on a point basis. And all of that work is being performed in Word, in the tool that you're familiar with. And then any changes you make to the draft are being pushed to Agiloft for record keeping.
Thank you. Right, in our last 30 seconds, hand over to the superstar. Susan, closing comments.
Agiloft has changed my life. That's all I can say.
What a spectacular way to end.
I can find agreements, but even better now going forward, as the company changes, and it does change, I'm able to change with the company. So we have a tool that is satisfying our needs now, but I have every assurance that it will satisfy our needs going forward, which to me is just huge. I don't have to learn a new system for one. I don't have to redo any of those spreadsheets. It will be there, and as we change, Agiloft changes.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. It's always great to hear that from our practitioners. Agiloft have a webinar series that's coming up, as do World Commerce and Contracting. So learn more. Do engage in the training that's made available to you. We are, unfortunately, where did that hour go? We've run out of time. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much to Susan and to Danielle and to our friends at Agiloft. Thank you for partnering with the session with us today, and to thank you, our audience, for some really great questions. So many more questions about integration and the what can and can't get integrated. I'm sure our Agiloft crew will be back to answer your questions directly. But I do hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. So thank you for your time, and goodbye. Thank you, guys.